Great. Welcome to the September FinCom meeting. It's Tuesday, September 25th, 2018, 7:33, Jane, start time.
7:34.
7:34, great. So we are opening up for anyone that would like to record the meeting. We've granted permission to Westcat to record. Thank you. No one wants to record? Okay, we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. So welcome, Ms. Parks. Our first agenda item, we had sent along kind of some pre-questions to help kind of shape the discussion and so you could anticipate our questions, and then the broader update on the MSBA project.
Yes, great.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for inviting me, and thanks for sending the questions in advance. So I have put together some slides that I think cover the questions that you posed. And so basically I thought first I would just talk about where we are in the MSBA process, and then I'll transition and talk a little bit about the district improvement strategy, where some of our priorities are right now, and think ahead a little bit to some very preliminary ideas about budget. Okay. Right. So, it went blank again.
I wonder if it's the Wi-Fi.
I don't know. Okay, there we go. I was going to say, because my first point is a visual. So, okay, so I thought it might be helpful to have an overview of the timeline for the MSBA process. And it is, in fact, quite a long timeline, so it's hard to get it onto one slide here. But, you know, we had the warrant article at town meeting last May, and that article was about securing funding to fund the feasibility study. We were actually quite a bit ahead of schedule in taking that question to town meeting in the spring. That was partly because we thought, well, if for some reason it didn't go well at the spring town meeting, we would still have time to try again. And so for that reason, I think people are somewhat surprised to see that we are still very much at the beginning of this process. So we're in what's called the eligibility period. It started on June 1st. And our eligibility period goes until February 28th. So I'm actually going to move this arrow, and you can see that if we sort of fast forward to the end of this school year, June of 2019, we're still in forming the project team and just about to go into the feasibility study. So this is going to be, you know, a long process. And then if we zoom ahead another school year, it'd be by the spring of 2020 that we would have our preferred solution. And in other words, the school building committee would have determined just what specifically the project is, and we would have what the MSBA calls our preferred schematic design. And it would be at that point that we would need to go to the voters to talk about funding the total project. And so according to this, you know, estimated timeline, we would probably be looking at fall of 2020 for that. Now, I should just put one caveat on. I mean, I took sort of a sample timeline that the MSBA provides, and I superimposed our dates onto it. And how in reality it will unfold, I'm not sure it'll be precisely like that, but I thought that would give you a sense of what we're looking at here. Okay. So we have been diligently working through the tasks of the eligibility period. As I said, our eligibility period started on June 1st, and we have until February 28th to complete these tasks. But at this point, we, in fact, have most of them done. And you can see there are two things remaining that are in progress that are due by November 28th. But sort of the big task of securing the funding for the feasibility study has already happened. So I'll talk a little bit about each of these deliverables. The first task was to form the school building committee. The school building committee has very prescribed roles that have to be filled. So these roles are something that the MSBA gave to us. So, you can see where it says, local chief executive officer, that's Mike Walsh. Administrator is Mike Gillette. I think that it is possible that this group could expand to include some other members of the community. But this committee has a particular function, and so really we would be looking for members of the community who have architecture, engineering, or construction experience, who could kind of bring that expertise to the group. So that happened in July. And then in August, there were two things that we needed to submit. We submitted what's called the enrollment questionnaire. And in the enrollment questionnaire, we provided the MSBA with a whole bunch of enrollment data and demographic information. So our historic enrollment data, our enrollment projections. They wanted to know all kinds of things: how many building permits have been pulled in town, things about birth rates, real estate development, anything that we know is on the horizon that could possibly impact school enrollment. So we submitted that. And then we submitted the educational profile questionnaire. So that was a bunch of educational questions so that they could understand the programs we have, our philosophy, how we approach things pedagogically. They're interested in our current grade levels and configurations, our special ed models. And they did ask them to do some very preliminary thinking about possible changes. So, is there any chance that we would consider a different configuration for our buildings? Is there anything that we know that if we had different kinds of space, we would change programmatically? So, if you had a giant lab available to be doing science or coding, what would you do? So, for example, one thing that we said is, we think we should explore moving the preschool into an elementary building from the current space at the high school. So we gave them that information, and now what's next is that between now and the end of November, we are engaging with the MSBA in a bit of a back and forth process to determine what the enrollment number will be, sort of the, what is the premise that we're going to use as we go forward with this project about what the district enrollment will be. So the MSBA has people who take all this information and they use a particular methodology to come up with those projections. We did a similar study ourselves. The school committee commissioned something in 2015, so we have a lot of this data. But we are currently working with NESDEC. It's a group that we're an affiliate of that does this kind of work, just to do an update of that information in case there are sort of new variables that we didn't know 3 years ago. And then we're going to be meeting with the MSBA third week of October to begin the conversation and see if we agree what the enrollment projection looks like. And so that's really the final thing that we need to do for the eligibility period. So once we complete the eligibility period, we have to request that the MSBA vote us into the next phase. And so we have until the end of February to do that, but at the last school committee meeting, the school committee asked if it was possible to speed up the process. And given that it looks like we're going to have the eligibility period tasks done by the end of November, we could ask the MSBA if they would consider taking that vote about moving us to feasibility at their December board meeting. And so we are planning to explore that just to see if we can accelerate things along by at least a couple of months. But so at whatever point that we get voted in, be that January or March, the first tasks that happen are that we need to hire the owner's project manager, the OPM, and that is a task of the school building committee. They're the ones who are charged with doing that process. And then the second thing is to select the designer, the architect. That's an MSBA-led process. The MSBA has a designer selection panel, and they have a particular process that they use to do that. They have 12 members, and then we're allowed to send 3 representatives from the school district to be part of that process as well. And I'm told by people who have been through this experience before that those 2 tasks will take about 4 to 6 months to complete. So that will be the work of the winter and early spring to do that. I've also been told by people who are familiar with this process that it's quite important to have the OPM and the designer on board in order to do the feasibility study. So you need those people to be a part of the process. So, as I mentioned, a decision for this year is that we could begin the feasibility study earlier, which I think we are going to move forward with. And then the other big thing to consider is the timeline for community input. And so what the school committee began discussing at its last meeting is, should we be beginning that process this spring? Obviously, if you don't start in the spring, you kind of can't do anything in the summer, and that would push things out to the fall. So I think that is what we're going to decide to do, and the school committee will be talking about that at an upcoming meeting. Whereas the community engagement last year leading up to town meeting, I felt like was a lot of our getting out there and talking to people about what the issue is, and sort of educating people about the need and encouraging them to come to town meeting. This part of the process has to do with engaging people to give us information, right? So that we can understand what people want in terms of this project, what it is that they hope it will do for education in Westwood. And so we really need to think carefully about how best to engage people. And I imagine that it will involve things like surveying and focus groups and all kinds of community forums. I can tell you that some communities choose to hire consultants who do this kind of work to lead those processes, and I think that's something the school committee may consider as well. But I will just say that I think it's important for people to understand the timeline. We talked a lot about the project last year, and I don't want anyone to think that because they're not hearing from us this fall that means something is happening in secret. It's just that we're still in this eligibility period, and we really haven't gotten to the part yet where we start talking about, what is our vision for this project. I also would note that I think last year we worked really hard at demonstrating our commitment to engaging the community around this. I can say that I personally did 13 community forums about the building project last year, including going to Fox Hill Village and the Council on Aging, and really trying to extend our reach beyond just parents in the school department. We did a mailing to all residents. We had 3 different articles in the local paper. I was on, is it Westwood Today? I did that in January and March to talk about the building project. We hosted open houses and tours at our elementary building. So we worked hard at that, and I hope that that in part that process, engenders some confidence and trust that is what the school committee and the school department plans to do throughout this whole process. So if anything, I hope we are accused of over-communicating this year about this. So as I mentioned, the timeline for funding, we already secured the funding for the feasibility study. We're very much hoping that the actual cost of the feasibility study will be considerably less than what we asked to be appropriated, but we wanted to be for sure that we could get through the feasibility study. So the funding for the total project, probably fall of 2020. By that point, by the time we're going out to say, okay, here's what we think we need to fund this project, we will know what the preferred solution is. So people will know what it is they're funding, and we will also by that point know what the MSBA reimbursement rate is. Their base rate is 31%, and then there are ways that you can increase that percent a little bit by sort of getting these bonus points based on things like maintenance plans and if you did things in an environmentally sound way, for example. Presumably, a project at this scale would require a debt exclusion override. It's difficult to say at this point what the total cost of the project will be because we haven't done any of that discussion about what the project is. But I will say a big number, which is that I think probably we're looking at somewhere between $40 and $60 million prior to the MSBA reimbursement. I say that because 3 years ago, the school committee did commission this master plan capital needs study. And through that process, we have a report that presented all kinds of different options and kind of estimated costs for them. that looked at everything from, systems upgrades to the 5 elementary schools and call it a day, to consolidating 5 to 4, consolidating 5 buildings to 3 buildings, and doing additions on other schools, all kinds of options. But that was the range, and I should note that was 3 years ago, so I'm not sure to what extent those estimates are accurate. I also have taken a look at some projects that have been done recently through the MSBA with some other communities. So, for example, Hopkinton, just in June, opened an elementary school. They did that through MSBA. That project was about $45 million, and they were reimbursed about a third. Needham is in the process of completing an elementary project right now. It's a sort of medium-sized school. It's about 500 and low 500s, 540 kids, I think it's built for. And their project, not including they had to purchase land, without the land purchase was $59 million, and they got 34.7%, I think, reimbursed. So I think that at least gives us some rule of thumb. That's what I've got for MSBA. So let me pause there and see if there are.
I'm sorry, Emily, what was the Hopkinton reimbursement rate?
So, it was a $45 million project, and they got back about $15 million, so it was about a third.
Oh, okay, 50.
Yeah.
So I guess oops,
No, go ahead, George.
comment I have, my guess is that you probably have a core of parents who are gonna be totally supportive of the fact we have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you got, for the non-experts in the field, the sooner you can clarify, what you're gonna do with the 5 schools, the easier it will be for, I think, people to focus on it. But my sense is there's probably a group of, I ask this question, what percentage of the 13,000 or 14,000 people who live in Westwood have children in the elementary schools right now?
So I don't know in terms of number of families. I can tell you we have 3,100 kids, and there are multiple kids in many
Sure.
families. So I think what we're getting at is it's a relatively
See, it's a
lower.
to a half.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll just
I
pick a
think
number.
that's about
But then
right.
you've got the half that just are not because they don't care, but they're not engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is, how do you, what's the process to involve them and make them understand? People move to this town because of the school system.
Mm-hmm.
People's kids, go on, they're in college, and they're off thinking about other things in life. And to me, I guess it's gonna be a very big number and a very important number. So how do you start educating your non-core, interested, knowledgeable base about the fact we got a big issue? Because I wanna make sure that other group is supportive, especially at town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I quite agree. I think that is the challenge, right? That this is an investment that we're making, we're asking all residents to make in the future of the community. So, some of the things that we did last year was we said, well, I'm not just going to send things out on the school listserv. We literally mailed something to all residents. I think that the quarterly town newsletter that is going to get into the hands of every resident is a way that we can push information out. Certainly getting out there and, going over to Fox Hill again is something we're going to need to do. And I think the challenge really is to ask people not just to sort of read the information, but to come out and speak to us so that we know what's on their minds and what they're thinking. The process of determining what the preferred solution is going to be both an educational question, right? And obviously, it's going to be a financial question. So what do we want, and also what can we afford? Those are two things that we're going to have to take a close look at. I will have to think more carefully about this, but one of the things that we talk about in education a lot is not waiting to the end to find out how things went, right? Checking in periodically to say, how are we doing? What are people thinking now? What do people understand? And I think that for a process like that, that'll be important.
I also think, I think if you, especially in the police station, I thought that the videos that the chief produced, and they did a walkthrough, literally with him walking it through, because when you looked at the building from the outside, it looked like they took care of it, even though it was way beyond the capacity needs of the town. And I thought the fact that the chief got out there And, you know, they produced the video, it was online. You could start to direct people, if you can't come and tour all 5 schools, you're not, go to the video, look at it. And you know, besides just going to Fox Hill, I mean, actually, I just, in my own mind, I just don't know how you get the rest of the town to really focus on this, so that by the time you get to town meeting, people understand it. People, you know, understand the need and are fairly comfortable that, yes, we have to do this, and then they got to decide whether or not they want to support it because of the debt override.
Yeah. Well, frankly, I am open to suggestions on this point, because I fully appreciate that this is the challenge, to get people to engage. I mean, you know, I said I did 13 community forums. It wasn't that there were hundreds of people at each of those
I know,
community
it's
forums, right?
And it's frustrating. Well, we went through the same thing with the Islington Task Force. You would hold all these public hearings, and then people would come to FinCom and say, we know nothing about it. And you'd sit there saying, I mean, we posted on the town website, we did videos, we posted at the Roach Brothers, and, you know, so you sit there struggling. So all I can think of right now with your group was, how do you reach, if you had to reach out to that group, where is it? I mean, do you contact the League of Women Voters? Do they do a forum? Do you, you know, to go to a local church event? I don't know, but where can you grab people in this town? So by the time you get to it, Emily, you know, they're on board. I think what people are going to want to hear, my guess, is, what is your recommendation as the superintendent? You know, back of everybody's mind, is it, are we going to have 5 schools, 3 schools? I mean, I am the least knowledgeable. But the sooner you can clarify that is when I think you can start to get out there and really do the outreach.
Yeah. So the process in the feasibility study is that the school committee is charged with creating what's called the educational plan, which is a very substantial document. It's like hundreds of pages. I have samples from other places. And that's where the community input comes in, because that's where you really articulate what is the vision of what we want education to look like, how the space, you know, will facilitate that vision. And then that information is what gets turned over to the school building committee and to the designers to say, okay, what are some possible options that fulfill that criteria, right? How do we make that happen? And then to take a look at costs and all of that. So, yeah, I mean, I will be thinking hard about this, because that may be that as we go through that process, we're sending out sort of preliminary things. Here's sort of what we're thinking now. Let's get some feedback from the community. Now here's what we're thinking. Let's get some feedback.
Just one more question, I'm sorry. Are we going to have any significant capital needs between now and 22? I mean, can we patch things together and keep it going, or are there some things we're going to have to do whether we like it or not?
Yeah, so, well, I'll turn to Heath for that question. We're hoping that.
I think we're in good shape.
Okay.
We got the funding for the elevator at the middle school last year.
Okay.
So we'll be completing that actually next summer, but beyond that, we're not anticipating any large expenditures.
Right.
Only thing I don't like about your presentation is, why is it 5 to 6 years?
I know.
Projects never take less time than you say at the beginning. You know, you're telling me 5 years, I'm guessing it's going to end up being 6 or 7 years, which sounds ridiculously long.
Yeah, well,
And this committee will be vastly different, the town will be, you want to get people involved now, the parents who have kids in the school now won't necessarily have them in 7 years. There's got to be a way to do this faster.
well, I wish that were the case, and I can only tell you that the timeline that we're looking at is, in fact, the timeline that the MSBA has told us what it's going to be, and when I speak to superintendents in other districts that have been through this process, that's about how long it takes. And when we were talking about this last year, yeah, I didn't even say 5 years if you counted it 6, and we had said 6 to 10 years before we have a building open.
So can you clarify
What did you
that,
say?
though, that the end state, and without saying it's going to be 3 schools, 2 schools, whatever, but the funding would cover the potential remodels of schools and new facilities, or just new facilities? When we say 5 years, is it?
Yeah.
is the elementary schools as a whole are in the place we want them to be, or 1 or 2?
Right. So that's an important question. So you remember that when we submitted our statement of interest, it was for Hanlon, because
Right,
we can
right.
only get in with one school, but we made clear from the beginning that really we are looking with this project to address not just the needs of Hanlon, but, you know, other needs. I mean, the MSBA isn't going to build us 2 schools, right? So that isn't going to happen.
Right.
But I think there may be some opportunities to have a project where we're building 1 school and then perhaps a renovation somewhere or an addition somewhere, right? And that's what the feasibility study is about, to work with them.
And the funding is in that. A $60 million would include potentially both.
Yeah, and so I will say that the MSBA reimbursement, I mean, it has to do with what they call eligible expenses, right? So, I mean, to take a ridiculous example, this is what I mean by they're not going to build us 2 schools. We could say, well, that's what we really want to do. Well, they're not going to reimburse for both, right? And so that's what we would have to be working out with them. I think the MSBA, you know, they are motivated to be taking aging school buildings off of the rolls, right? That's sort of their mission. So they're interested in looking for a solution that works for us, for our needs, and is efficient and cost-effective.
Is part of that, Emily, where if the scope of the new building, say the new Hanlon, just for hypothetical purposes, but if that were ratcheted down and another school was built up, that's obviously part of the overall strategic plan. So
Right.
that's why, that would be part of the reimbursement package. I
Yes,
guess.
it's all part of the plan,
Because
yes.
it's all connected, right? A renovation or an expansion, another school would impact the major project.
Yes, right. So, I mean, we would be thinking about things like redistricting, which I know is an alarming thing to hear. But, yeah, we would be looking at those kinds of structural changes to address those needs, yep.
I had one other question on the timing, too, kind of on the heels of George and Howard's comments, but the funding for the project looks like it's approaching fall of 2020. What town meeting are we shooting for?
Right. Well, if I can do what Howard wants and speed it up, then, you know, maybe it would be spring, the prior spring, right? Well, and now that I think about, I do have to think about that, because this would be like a voters go to the ballot situation, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, in consultation with you all, we would have to figure out what the best timing is.
As
And,
soon as could be probably fall.
right, and
Yeah.
if it was ready for, now, there's no fall town meeting this fall, but if this item is on the docket, then obviously we'd have a fall town, I should
Right.
say obviously,
No,
we would
yes.
have a town meeting.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was just looking at that and trying to work the timeline backwards
Yeah.
and see maybe where things could possibly be accelerated. But because if you don't hit that fall town meeting, then you're looking at the following spring.
Yeah, I mean, correct. So we will need to be mindful of that, right? We don't want to have the delay come in because we're sitting around waiting.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Remember, and then it requires a vote, too. There has to be, it's beyond the town meeting, then we have to have a
Override vote?
vote,
Override vote.
town vote, election, whatever they call it, I mean, because it's an override.
Right, and we come first.
Yep.
So, at this point, like, talking about that, which was, I don't necessarily know that you need to have a town meeting for it, like, it's just, you always have to go to the ballot. So that could be any time during the vote.
No, if you're going to have a debt exclusion, you need it approved at town meeting.
At town
and a
meeting,
vote.
I think, after the
Yes,
vote,
you'd have to go to
right?
town meeting to approve the money that was
Yeah.
voted for.
Oh, if he's talking.
Yeah,
hand the
if you
mic.
could just
Oh.
speak into the
Any other questions? Go ahead,
Go
Jim.
ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the MSBA submissions that you've already made, are those public someplace?
Can
Can they be
They
public?
can be public, yes. I could post them on our
Yeah,
website.
so I just, in the, thinking of transparency and everything like that, should there be a spot in the school committees or the school department's website that
We-
everything you wanted to know about the project, to keep the information out there for people?
We in fact have a web page that is dedicated to the building project, and yes, I will post those documents we submitted in August.
I guess I'm just following up on that. You talked about submitting enrollment projections and birth rates. What were your findings?
Gosh, I will not be able to remember all of those things off the top of my head, but it's in the documents that I will post on the website. So, what What were, do you remember? I really don't remember off the top of my head, so I don't want to
Have
make
a
up numbers.
Guesstimate was enrollment increasing, decrease? I can't imagine if it was decreasing, we'd have a successful chance of,
So the overall enrollment of the district, like 10 years out, do you remember about what it was? I don't know, I'm sorry, I'll have to take a look at that. I mean, well, I don't know, I think I don't know.
Can I
So I'll
Fair
take a
enough.
look. Yeah.
Some of these kids aren't even born yet, if we're out 6 years, right? So do we really know?
Well,
I mean, we might know total
They have to live
school, but
somewhere,
you don't know.
they have to live somewhere, so you know, like, what you've got for building permits.
That's,
and-
yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's why
You'll know
it's not
that-
us that's making
right.
the enrollment projection. We're looking at people who
Oh, okay.
do this for a living, and they look at all kinds of demographic
Oh, okay.
stats.
I
and
thought
stuff.
you were-
So, you know, for example, they look at things called cohort survival rates, right? Like if you have X number of people coming in a particular grade in kindergarten, how many do you retain over time versus, you know, who moves in? They look at things like, if you have a brand-new school building, does that then attract more people to town and your enrollment goes up? And the MSBA has found that there is like a small but real impact to that, so those kinds of things are happening.
I think in past years too, we were told that enrollment is declining. So
Oh, yeah.
I think that would have an impact on
Yeah.
our reimbursement or project if they're looking at declining. enrollment.
Yeah, so the enrollment of the district over the last 10 years has remained about the same overall, but the enrollment has been shifting. So the elementary enrollment has been declining over the past decade. Yeah, that's true.
But there are various reasons for building a new building, it's just not because of expansion of.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm
because
not
it's-
putting
yeah,
all the eggs in
okay.
one basket, no.
Right.
What could cause this to be derailed? Anything?
Sure. I mean,
Is there a precedent with the MSBA?
with the MSBA? Okay. So, no. So I asked that question to the MSBA when we were first being invited in. And what they told me is that from their point of view, no, there really isn't anything that would prevent us from being voted from phase to phase as long as we're meeting our deadlines and our deliverables. So, you know, from their perspective, they said that if we hit all those things and the community voted the feasibility study funding, we'll get advanced.
So we're not competing against other communities?
No, we're not anymore. We've been
So
invited.
we've already
in.
passed that hurdle?
Yes, and so part of what's happening now in terms of this process right now to determine what the enrollment number is that they have invited in a certain number of communities for particular projects, and they've got to figure out what the scope of those projects are because they've got to be able to fund them going forward. Yeah.
But let me just add something. So I'm not expert, so I will say, there's certainly, if you look, there's been communities that have had community challenges, whether or not that's MSBA. So Wellesley,
Right.
if you go to Wellesley, there's certainly, you can see signs about safe neighborhood schools. There was a community in the North Shore that actually MSBA did, I think, postpone because there was, again, kind of an issue. So I'm not saying, there's certainly, to the point around community engagement, I think it's going to be around getting engagement, at least from my point of view, engagement and alignment on the community and what we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, what could derail the project
Right.
would be like something
Right.
here, right? Or are we?
A vote,
Yeah,
negative vote.
right.
But I mean, from an MSBA perspective, in trying to meet a December timeline as opposed to February, was there, that was just a matter of just to get it done by then, or there's no urgency? or
No,
concern?
that was really just, can we
Okay.
keep the timeline moving? It's nothing more than that. Yeah.
And
Oh,
there
go
is,
ahead.
sorry, there is experience of one town that rejected the MSBA, and that was Lincoln. And they decided not to, they didn't pass the vote, and guess what? In the words of John Antonucci, their need didn't go away, and they are now building an elementary school all on their own with no reimbursement.
That was included in the well-done FinCom summary.
The write-up, I saw that there, yes, I was there.
I didn't read that, I'm sorry. I'll admit it.
Whoever did that.
It was
did a
probably
really nice
you,
job.
Bob.
No, it wasn't, it was Tom.
Oh.
You think Tom would say that about me?
He can pass them out.
And he has it right, and he has it right there.
Any other MSBA? Emily had a few other things she wanted to cover, and we can let her go on with her night.
Okay, thank you. So,
Because I know somebody.
You sent along some questions about sort of what the school department's working on, and so I want to talk a little bit about our district improvement strategy that we just published about a week ago. So last year, in my first year as superintendent, I conducted an entry plan. I heard from a lot of different stakeholders and published some entry findings last spring, and that's guided the development of this district improvement strategy. And we have identified priorities that guide the work and also the allocation of resources. I gave you a larger version of this as the last page in your packet, which is, this is microscopic. But we basically have this one-page strategy for district improvement. You can see we've got our vision and mission and core values. We have identified sort of 4 major strategic objectives that we will be working on for the next 3 to 5 years. So sort of these big buckets you can see there. The first 3 are intentionally focused around what we call the instructional core. So instruction, curriculum, students, right? Meaningful learning experiences, coherent, connected curriculum, and healthy and supported school community. And then you can see the 4th objective has to do with facilities for the future, which it has to do with the building project and also the security audit that we're working on, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the structure of the document, we have the objectives, which are like 3 to 5 year objectives, and then we've identified for each of those 3 annual priorities for the upcoming school year. And this document is on our website. Each of those priorities is hyperlinked so that you can click on it and you can see specific action steps that we're taking this year. So I'm not going to go over all of this, but I just want to highlight a couple because they speak to some things about budget and budget priorities. So you can see under meaningful learning experiences, the first one is continue to explore and implement inquiry-based STEM initiatives. And we are in the 3rd year of a 3-year process of getting aligned to the new state science standards and also to really thinking about how we're approaching science. We've been doing a lot of work around that. So, you know, for example, here's one action step. We're phasing that in, K-8. That has had budget implications. We have, over the last couple of years, added a half-time elementary science coordinator, a half-time middle school science coordinator, 1.5 elementary science content specialists. We've purchased new curriculum materials. We've purchased all kinds of equipment, and turns out with this new way of approaching elementary science, there's a lot of consumables. There's a lot of hands-on things that they're doing. So there's some ongoing expenses there. So, you know, that's one example of how what we're working on would be reflected in the budget development. Another one of our priorities is to expand and invest in programs and practices that provide authentic student-centered learning. We've really been thinking a lot about how do you create authentic engagement with kids. And so one example of that is that we piloted last year something called J-Term. It stands for June Term. This is at the high school. And what it was we created a week-long term where we had 37 electives that were developed in-house, and kids got to choose one class that they would take all day, every day for 5 days, like a 30-hour course. And I'm just going to show you here. This is sort of our vision statement for J-Term. The idea was that it would give kids this immersive learning experience where they could really take a deep dive into something, and that it would be exploratory. Kids would be creating, they'd be doing things, and that it would be different from some of the experiences we have that are guided by, 45-minute periods and grades. So it was pass-fail, so that kids could kind of risk it and take something they didn't know if they were good at. And it was a really exciting pilot. I just threw a few pictures up here to make it come alive. Here are some of the 37 courses that we did. And we gathered a whole bunch of feedback. We did all kinds of focus groups with kids in the development of the courses and determining what we were going to offer. And got lots of feedback from them, both quantitative and qualitative, about how it went. And it was really great feedback. So something like 94% of our kids said that they thought their J-term course either met or exceeded their expectations. And nearly 90% of kids said that they would be excited to do J-term again. And if you spend a lot of time with teenagers, it is hard to get 90% of them to say that they're excited to do something. So we feel really good about this. And so we're planning to do it again. Now, the way that we funded it, this for the pilot, is that we funded it partially out of putting sort of some seed money in the operating budget, but we also got a $20,000 grant from the Foundation for Westwood Education, which was incredibly generous, and I am very thankful that they took a leap of faith on this idea. But now that we've decided we want to continue it, we really have to think about how we can make that sustainable within the operating budget without the grant money. So that's something that you'll see reflected in this year's budget proposal. Finally, I was asked sort of what are some things that high-performing districts are thinking about in general? Are there trends or issues that are coming up? This third objective about healthy and supported school community, I think, really speaks to that. We're thinking a lot about the acronym in the field is SEL, social emotional learning. And this was something that I heard a lot about from teachers and parents during my entry process. You know, we've experienced an uptick in students at all levels who are struggling with mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, things like that. That's not unique to Westwood by any means. And in addition, we know that we need to build up some of kids' core competencies around self-management and relationship skills and responsible decision-making and all kinds of things like that. So we're really thinking about that quite a bit, and I think you will see some initiatives coming up soon that are around that. We've already done some things. You know that we have really expanded our capacity within the district to serve all kids with some of our programming. So for example, we have a therapeutic program that deals with kind of social, emotional, behavioral challenges. We have it in elementary, middle school, and high school. In the last 3 years, we've added an adjustment counselor at the middle school, a social worker at the high school. And we think we're getting a good return on that investment. We're seeing a significant decrease in the number of students who are going out to hospitalizations. So, we think we're doing some good work there. And now we really want to be shifting our attention to how can we not just be responding to needs, but how can we be preventative? So we're thinking about that quite a bit. So that's kind of the quick overview, but it's on the district website if you want to get into more details. So very preliminary thinking for the FY20 budget. We are currently in the last year of the teacher's contract. We're going into collective bargaining in the next couple of months. So that obviously is a variable. When we think about building a budget, we're always thinking about things like class sizes and then programs, right? Those are sort of the two big drivers. I just talked about some things programmatically. The class sizes right now are in good shape. Our elementary class sizes are quite good this year. We only have one grade in one school that is over the school committee guideline, and it's only by one kid. I think that is partially due to the fact that we created a buffer zone for our districting at University Station this year, and we determined that new families coming in would be assigned partly based on where we had space within those class size guidelines. So we have kids now from University Station at Downey, Hanlon, and Deerfield. And that was actually very helpful in terms of smoothing out class sizes. We obviously are keeping siblings together and things like that. So elementary's in good shape. Middle school, the population is, the enrollment number is going down at the middle school, and we've got stable staffing. It's freeing up some space too, and so we're seeing some decreases in class size. If anything, we may be looking if we can we may be able to reduce a little bit of staff there. And then at the high school, that's where we have our enrollment bubble right now. It's still going up. We added in math and science last year. We saw a reduction in class sizes there, but social studies and English is still very high. So we'll be looking at that this year. Last year's budget focused on splitting our Westward Applied Behavioral Analysis program in two, and so that was a significant driver. We do not anticipate any new special education programs this year in-house. As you know, though, the special education budget is a piece of the budget that's the least predictable because it is so dependent on student needs. So the tuition and transportation can be unpredictable. We are, next year, we will be eliminating the kindergarten fee. We did a step down this year. Next year, it will be gone. However, our plan in the budget is that it will actually take 4 years to completely get rid of the offset from the tuition. So we'll be working on that for a couple years, and we anticipate no major capital projects outside of the annual budget. And finally, I had a question about Article 18 from last year, the comprehensive security audit. So this is a security audit of both municipal and school buildings. So I've been working with Mike Gillette on this, and Chief Deckers and Chief Silva. The RFP went out at the end of August. We heard presentations from 8 different outfits a couple of weeks ago. We have evaluated the written non-price proposals, and we're reconvening very soon to open up the price bids and to award the bid, hopefully quickly. The way that the RFP was framed is that the school audit would take the first priority. So in other words, if we hire somebody who doesn't have the capacity to do them simultaneously, that the school department would be first, and then the municipal buildings. The time frame in the RFP is 90 days to complete the school audit and have a written set of recommendations. So we're hoping that if there are recommendations that have budget implications, we can think about that for next year.
Thank
That's
you.
it.
Any questions? Thank you so much.
All right,
We really
thanks.
appreciate it. Thank
I
you.
will post those documents, and I will get the enrollment information
G-term was
for you.
great. I heard kids
Oh,
talking
good.
about it for weeks after.
So glad to hear that. Yeah, I think it's one of the.
Teenage boys talking about it.
Teenage boys. It's one of the more exciting things I think we've done in a long time, and I feel like it was a big project, and we pulled it off, so, yeah.
Great.
Congrats.
Thank you. All right.
How did the teachers like it?
I'm generally very good feedback. I would say a number of people described it as transformative, like the best thing they've done in their career. So that was really exciting. And a few people who were unhappy. So, you know. That's how it goes.
Teenagers were happier than teachers.
No, I think I think there was some of it.
They did.
That's
I mean,
great.
they loved it. They loved it. And, yeah, they loved it. And it was tough because it was the 5 days following final exams. So they were like grading their exams and teaching something for the first time. And it was really, yeah, it was remarkable what they did.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome. We sent you a few questions ahead of time too,
You
right?
did, yes.
Great. I
So,
hope that helped.
Yes, it did, so
We're going to try to be better at that to
it's
have our
very helpful, so I
presenters.
can focus on what I know you're most interested in.
Great.
So if I
Thank
could,
you for joining. No, go right ahead.
I'll just take them one question at a time to start with, and then if there's anything else that you think of as I'm talking about that, feel free to jump in and ask me. So the first question you proposed was, how is the initial development of Islington Center going? And the short answer is it's going very well, and much as was expected. As you all know, in the annual town meeting in the end of May, we had 3 articles, Articles 11, 12, and 13, that were all approved by 2/3 vote at town meeting. Article 11 allowed the Board of Selectmen to enter a land disposition agreement with the developer to sell properties in Islington and to receive properties in exchange. The land development agreement was signed by the selectmen on June 11th, and then the first amendment to that agreement was signed on July 23rd. Both are posted to the website. If anyone has any questions, you can review those. Article 12 was a funding article. that really applies further down the line when we get to the third phase of the project. And Article 13 was a zoning amendment article, and that called for rezoning of 2 parcels of land in Islington Center, one where the Westwood Tailor Shop used to sit, and one, the Cohen residential property. They were both approved for rezoning at town meeting, and the Attorney General's approved the zoning amendment bylaw just about a week ago, on September 14th. The bylaw has been posted by the town clerk, and upon that posting became effective, retroactive to May 30th. So the zoning that was approved at town meeting is now our official zoning in town. The Petruzziello properties are working on getting a lease signed with CVS. They've actually come to final terms on the lease and are expected to receive the signed document before the end of next week. They're also preparing an application for a demolition permit to take down the old Cafe Diva building and the Westwood Tailor Shop building. The Cafe Diva building had a prior approval by the Westwood Historical Commission for a demolition delay authorization, and that had a delay period that expired the end of July 26th. So they're now ready to go ahead with that. They're doing utility removal right now. They will be putting up fencing in the next week, dust control, and then we expect the buildings to come down in early October. That'll be the first start for the CVS construction. So that's moving along pretty quickly. We recently received word from the developer that they have an intention of taking the Blue Heart Tavern and redeveloping it. So that was good news. We're not looking for another party to do that. Petruzziello Properties will do it themselves. And Representatives McMurtry and Senator Rush have actually secured, or they're working to finalize securing funding for that project in the amount of approximately $75,000 that will go towards preserving the exterior of the structure. So that was an exciting, something we weren't expecting. So it really helps the project move along. What we're working on right now is the application to the Department of Housing and Community Development for the third affordable unit at 321 Washington Street. You may remember that was one of the conditions of the planning board approval. That enables all of the units at 321 Washington Street to be added to the subsidized housing inventory. So right now, the housing agent, Sarah Bouchard, is just waiting for the marketing plan, Fair Housing Marketing Plan. And once we receive that, the application's ready to go into the state, and we expect it to be turned around probably within about 30 days. That's a prerequisite for the first closing, so we have not yet transferred any property to the developer. After we get approval from DHCD, then the first closing can take place. That first closing is the sale of all the land on the west side of Washington Street by the town to Petruzziello. So our municipal lot, we will sell to Petruzziello. They will temporarily own everything on the west side of the street. They will build CVS and both parking lots, and then return us a site where we can put Wentworth Hall. The second closing will then be for land on the other side of the street, on the east side, where we will sell them the Wentworth Hall property after moving Wentworth Hall across the street to a new foundation that we built and putting an addition on it. And then the third sale will be the ICC building. After CVS and the parking lots are complete on the west side, Petruzziello will actually give us back land. We'll get the land that the Wentworth Hall will be sitting on, as well as the parking lot. So that's all in a staged set of closings. The first one we're hoping will happen in the fall of 2019. Second one fall of 2018. Second one fall of 2019. Third one fall of 2020. There's some flexibility there, but that's the time frame that we're working on right now. And we're beginning the process of the design for Wentworth Hall. We recently had a meeting to discuss moving the INET, which is currently located in the Islington Library building and serves both that building and the ICC. The INET is the internet service for town, the town network. So that will need to be relocated as part of the project. So that's it on the first question. The second one was the status of the University Station Phase 2. So part of Phase 2 involves the Brigham and Women's Office Building that is fully constructed now and ready to open next week. There'll be a ribbon cutting. I didn't check my calendar before I came over here. I think it's scheduled for Thursday. I know it's next week, and they're all ready to go. That's the first phase of that, and they're already looking at planning the second phase. So we didn't know how far down the line it was going to be for the second phase. It could be up to 5 years. Looks like it'll be sooner than that. I don't have a time frame yet, but the first phase is about 30,000 square feet. The second phase will bring the total up to about 80,000 square feet. So that's coming probably sooner than expected, and that will include structured parking as well. Westwood Place condominiums are the 100 condominium units, about half, a little more than half, 2 bedrooms, a little less than half, 1 bedroom, that are being developed by Pulte Homes on the east side of University Avenue, between Bridges Memory Care Facility and the Brigham and Women's Office Building. The foundations are complete, and the building permit application is pending. They expect to get underway in the next couple of weeks on constructing the first building. First building will have 50 units, and they actually already had their open house for the sale of those, of the market rate units. 45 of the 50 units in Building 1 are market rate. They had an open house, I believe it was on September 8th, and sold all of those 45 units and took a waiting list for units in the next building. So the price point must be right where it should be, and there's certainly a pent-up demand, a lot of interest in those.
Nora, can I just ask a question, just out of curiosity? Do we know if those are people who are planning on moving in? Because one of the things we read about what's going on in Boston is people are just buying them as investments.
Yeah, no, my understanding, I was not at the open house, and I don't have data, but my understanding is that they were people who were looking to move to Westwood.
It's astounding. It
I
went
think
that
it was
fast.
in with like 3 hours.
It was very quick.
Yeah.
Very quick. There's a lot of interest. It's
Wow,
it's
that's
very
impressive.
accessible to the highway and to MBTA.
And a lot of people were turned away. There were lots of, it
They-
was
they-
by lottery.
Yeah.
There were tons.
Filled the first building by lottery and then took a waiting list for the second building. Now, that doesn't include the affordable units. There'll be 5 affordable units in each building. And for those, Sarah Bouchard is now reviewing their marketing plan. That should go to the selectmen at their October 15th meeting and then to DHCD right after that. And the plan is for a lottery for the, at least 5 of the affordable units in the first building in spring, and then the 5 in the second building closer to when that building is complete. The plan calls for the first building to be done around July of 2019, and the second building would follow by the end of 2019, perhaps in December. So lotteries for affordable units are usually held within a month to 6 weeks before the sale is expected, so that we can be sure that the income statistics are valid at the time of the transfer.
Nora, 2 questions. On the Brigham and Women's, where would their second phase go?
So if you're looking at the building, if you're standing on University Avenue, you're looking at the building, it will go to the right. It will be
Okay,
between
still
that
along the
building
train?
and- Yes, along the train.
Okay.
So it'll go along the side. The main door of the building right now is on the right-hand side. That will be the center of the full building when it has 2
So over where
phases.
they've got parking now?
Yes, yeah,
And-
there's a landscaped area there, or an overgrown area right now that will be landscaped in the next few weeks.
They've been working on it.
Yes, and that will be just an open landscaped area for now. During construction of the second part of the building, that will be a parking lot, and then before the second part of the building opens, that will be a structured parking garage.
Okay, and on the condominiums, the foundation they've put is just for the first
No, they're
group, is
working on the
whole thing?
foundation for both buildings.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see the
The towers,
elevator
the
towers.
elevator towers,
Up there,
okay.
yeah, they're working on both foundations to start with, and they will frame out building 1, and then building 2 lags from 3 to 6 months behind in each of the construction trades, so, building 1 will be finished
So
first.
the big field that's in the middle, kind of between not your average Joe's and the entrance, like in front of that, there's nothing planned yet for that area?
So very close to University Avenue, that's open land that's slated for office development. Then between that open land and Brigham and Women's offices, there's a park that's been created that will run from Courtyard Hotel to the Bridges Memory Care Facility in front of Brigham and Women and the condominiums. So that's a linear park, and that's been completed. NED, New England Development, just completed that in time for the Brigham and Women's opening. Then there's land in front of that that's slated for 2 office developments. One of them, we're in progress of talking to someone, the other one is still being marketed. And then those would be in addition to 3 office plots or platforms up on the top of the hill behind Wegmans. Across from the former State Street building on Station Drive, there are 3 office spaces that are available. So a total of 5 office spaces. That's really the bulk of the remainder of University Station we expect to be office. Originally, the one of the buildings on University Avenue, close to Not Your Average Joe's, was being considered for mixed retail and office. That's still a possibility, or it may go all office, so that remains to be seen. We're in discussions
How
now.
tall will those be?
Likely 3 stories. That's what's expected now, but I don't have plans yet, and there's still ongoing discussion.
Can I ask you a question while we're on University Station? Do we get any tax revenue from Brigham and Women, or no?
So we have a pilot agreement with Brigham and Women's, which amounts to approximately 25% of the taxes that would have been paid by a for-profit institution. As a nonprofit institution, they're entitled to a pilot program. There was an upfront payment that was negotiated by the Board of Selectmen of, I believe it was about $300,000 that went to fund repairs to the senior center. So that covered taxes for several years in the pilot program. So that was paid up front, and then it's being credited against until they get to the point where they owe more taxes under the pilot program. And my recollection was that the $300,000 might have gone over a period of seven or 8 years. I don't remember offhand. I haven't looked at that recently. Other things at University Station, there's an acupuncturist that's moving into the former Orange Leaf space. They're working on the building right now to get it up to speed for their use. Bonefish Grill had been negotiating with Red Heat Tavern. Last I heard, the negotiations did not pan out, and that isn't a go. But I've heard conflicting reports, so never say never. That could be happening, and I know there's at least one other restaurant that may be considering that. So we're hopeful that Bonefish will eventually turn over as well. Question 3, is there any other significant business areas in town, any significant changes? One thing that we had heard last spring was that Tesla was interested in moving into the former Porsche Audi dealership at 420 Providence Highway. So that's on the east side of Providence Highway. Porsche and Audi moved to the west side into the new Prime dealerships and left that vacant. Tesla had looked at it. They'd actually gone to the Zoning Board of Appeals and received a special permit to occupy the space for a dealership. And then they were going to the planning board over the summer for a site plan review. But just before that meeting, they withdrew their application and said they were not ready. Nothing specific to Westwood, just corporate decisions were on hold as Tesla reorganized. So in the past 2 weeks, we've heard back from the representatives from Tesla that now they may be interested in going forward on it after all. So I don't have anything specific to report, but we're hopeful that they'll be back before the planning board in the next month or so, and that will move forward quickly. If they do decide to go ahead with it, it will be quick. There's not significant changes to the building they need to make. It'll be cosmetic changes and then just reorienting the parking lot. They do, a Tesla dealership's a little bit different than most dealerships. They don't have a lot of on-stock vehicles. Most vehicles are made to order and then brought in and moved off the lot by the owners pretty quickly.
To reorganize the power.
Yes. So
Some new plugs in.
we'll see. So that's still a big if, but we're hopeful it may come back soon. Also mentioned the Eversource building. Over the past year, they have restructured their building so that the first floor is now fully filled with non-Eversource businesses. And I believe they are looking to now move up to the second floor. They completely rehabilitated the building, the first floor, and have leased it out to other companies, and the first floor is fully occupied. Eversource offices are scattered across the second and third floor. We saw them consolidate their offices upstairs to free the first floor, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to do the same now on the second floor, because they are occupying smaller and smaller portions of that building. Also, I'll point out that 101 Station Drive, which has been developed, the former State Street building over the last couple of years, is fully occupied now as well. So all of the Class A office space in town is completely full. Another business we have in town, KLA Tencor, had been located at 90 Glacier Drive. They had been located 80 Wilson Way. They needed to expand. They moved into 90 Glacier Drive, so just a short hop over to another building. It's an interesting enterprise where they developed a new clean room, and it's a pretty exciting business. And I was happy to see that they expanded, but expanded in Westwood. They didn't look elsewhere, so that was a nice thing to see. The fourth question, what is going on with the empty facilities at Clark House and Westwood Lodge? So Clark House dissolved for reasons of their own, they were not able to continue at that location. It's not unusual. The nursing homes are struggling throughout the country. Fox Hill Village took over the property. They purchased the property from Clark House, and they are interested in rehabilitating it for different uses along their community continuum of care. We're still talking to them about exactly what that means, and whatever they do, they will need to go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Fox Hill Village operates under a special permit under the residential retirement community. I believe it was issued in 1988. It was amended as recently as 2012 when they created the White Oaks Cottages Memory Care Facility. So they would be going back to the zoning board for another amendment. But again, we're just in preliminary discussions, and I don't have specific information on what that would be. I don't expect a significant redevelopment. There may be a slight addition to the building, or they might just reuse the building as it is. Westwood Lodge, that has been, there have been negotiations between the current hospital owner and what they refer to as an unsolicited purchaser. As far as I know, the purchase and sales is still in progress, and they have not closed on it. Our understanding is that the potential buyer is interested in a residential development at that location, possibly as an open space residential development, and possibly as an age-restricted, so higher density residential development. So we're waiting to hear more. We've offered to meet with them, and we'll be ready to discuss whatever they need to do there and advertise everything, so neighbors who are interested are fully aware of it. The hospital, in the meantime, is continuing to operate out of the facility with their offices. They're not operating as a hospital, but they are using it for administrative purposes. So the non-conforming pre-existing use remains there. It has not yet been abandoned. So the option to reuse it for a similar non-conforming use remains valid for a period of 2 years from the date they stop operating. So just to caution everyone, it could still be reused as some form of hospital, which if it's in any way different from what is there now, would have to go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit, or it could be reused for residential purposes, single family, which would just be a subdivision by the planning board, or open space residential development, which could be either a subdivision or a special permit from the planning board, depending on the density they're looking for. It's 20 acres, and we have a lacrosse field that we use there. It's the SRC, single residency zoning, to 40,000 square foot minimum lot size, 20 acres, so that comes out to just about 20 house lots if they were to do a straight subdivision. If they were going to do an age-restricted senior residential development, the density bonus brings you to about 4 times that amount. However, it would be very difficult, I think, to actually reach a density of 80 units on that property with a setup that is attractive and approvable by the planning board. So I would say somewhere between 20 and 80. If it's age-restricted, much closer to 80 than 20.
Unless it's a 30B.
So the other option is that it could be a 40B project if we fall below 10%, which I hope we will not.
So that means if there's development, I think you started to say the fields that are used by different sports teams would be gone.
Yes. So, no, not necessarily. So the open
Okay.
space, if there's a high-density development, if there's a straight subdivision, 20 house lots under a straight subdivision, you're right, the fields would be gone. If there's an open space residential development, that requires them to set aside 50% of the property for open space. Field use is a perfectly appropriate open space use, and that's what we would be encouraging. So we'd be looking to save the fields, if not exactly where they are, somewhere else on that property. So those are the discussions that we've informed the owner that we would love to have with a potential buyer. So
Nora, did the town express interest in buying it?
Yes. So I actually was
Bid by
on a
the
phone
private
call,
buyer?
and the response was that it's well beyond the town's ability to buy this. And they had an unsolicited offer, and they were not considering other offers unless that fell through. So
That was what the seller
that's what the
said.
seller said, yes.
How did
The
their
seller
rep-
said that they had a very generous offer from an unsolicited buyer, and they would not consider an offer from the town or anyone else, that they intended to go in this direction, so. And that's why we
Assumption.
expressed that
Give
we
you
would
an offer
be
you
very
can't
interested
refuse.
in working with that developer to see if we could preserve our interest in the property. So that's where we're at, and as I hear more, I will let you know. Another question, please provide an overview of the municipal building project. How does this intersect with school project? And I think what the question was really referring to was the Municipal Facilities Task Force. So that's a group that was established by the selectmen about 2 years ago to look at municipal facilities. It actually evolved from another task force that looked at the public safety buildings. And then that was the Public Safety Task Force, then became the Municipal Facilities Task Force, which met last October in 2017, and at that time decided that it was more appropriately named the Town Facilities Task Force because it does have as its charge the review of all town-owned properties, including not only municipal buildings, but school buildings as well. So that task force is expected to meet again just after the MSBA School Building Committee meets. The School Building Committee is expected to meet in the next month, and then the Town Facilities Task Force will meet after that. Begin looking at the school buildings and at other municipal buildings in town to develop a long-term plan for what still needs to be done and in what order it ought to be done.
Nora,
Yes.
didn't we fund a study of the municipal buildings as they currently are?
So there has been a study, there have been a couple of studies. There was an update to a study before we did the police station and the fire station. There was a study that had been performed, I think, back in the early 2000s, and that was updated. So we have information on buildings like Town Hall that's in need of renovation, the High Street Fire Station, which is in pretty rough condition. And then we'll take the school building information added to that. There's a desire for a recreational facility. That's something that will come out of the Open Space and Recreation Plan, which is nearing completion. You'll hear about that. There's some interest in some form of a recreation building community center in town. So yes, there is a study. It's been updated, and it will continue to be updated.
I'm confused on the process, though. So we pay a company to come in, do a study, and then they get the results from early 2000 and more recent studies?
And then this task force had specific adjustments that would cause that. So there was I believe there was a study, and I don't remember the name of the company that produced it. It was before I worked here, that looked at several buildings. They looked at the Colburn School Building right here next door, the old library building, the police station, town hall, fire stations. That was around 2000, and they made some recommendations for what we should do. Then when we were looking at the municipal buildings, specifically the fire and police stations, we had some updates to that study performed, and the municipal task force is considering those updates and now expanding the idea to look at school buildings as well. So there is a study, there's a draft update to a study, and I believe it will go further than that. But as I said, we haven't met in nearly a year, so I think the idea was to put the brakes on while waiting for the school department to catch up.
So I'm just curious, so we invested this money in the studies, and then it's in a drawer somewhere, or?
I don't think it's in a draw, so I don't think so. So I think the study that was produced in 2000 that was looking at buildings in town, for instance, had looked at taking the Colburn School Building and moving it behind the old police station and reusing the library. Can't recall if I think they were going to put an addition on the old library rather than build a new library. In 2000, that seemed like the right thing to do. We then moved on, made changes to that study to build this building in, I think it was 2010, 2011, and then when we were looking at the fire station, and in the meantime, University Station came online, our needs changed a little bit. So it didn't make sense. We had the Colburn School Building, got a home here, right next to this building, and is in productive use. It no longer made sense to move it to behind the police station, and it made more sense to create a new police station there. We had searched throughout town looking for a place for Fire Station 2, and ended up putting it right where the old Fire Station 2 was, because that made sense. So we built on the studies that we had, but they evolved based on the needs of the town, as that had evolved, and based on other development in the town. So I would say we're looking to do the same thing. We have a study that provides some information, but then we build on it, and we constantly go back and add what has been done and what has changed in the town since then. So I don't think it's shelved. I think it's just something that we're building on and working on.
That first study done was at the beginning of the long-range financial planning subcommittee. And it was kind of, we went through and looked at all the facilities and tried to prioritize which one should be done, because it wasn't really done at that point. So there were a lot of possibilities looked at that point.
I think we'll continue to refine them and see what comes next. Now, I also believe when we were looking at the police station and the fire station, certainly when we were looking at the fire station, the new elementary school building was not yet on the horizon. So that's changed things, and that caused the Town Facilities Task Force to take a step back and wait to hear more on that.
Nora, I'm sorry, and this is separate from the open space and
Yes,
recreation
yes, it's
survey
different,
was
but
the-
that will feed into it. So the open space and recreation plan is something that was written in 2000 and is now being updated. We've had a committee looking at that for just about a year now, and the consultant produced a draft report, which I have on my desk now, and I'm about to send to the Open Space Recreation Planning Committee for their final review before it goes to the planning board. The hope is that that plan will be adopted by the planning board before the end of this year and then forwarded to town meeting in the spring for endorsement. And one of the recommendations that will call for will be consideration at some point in the future, not immediately, of some type of a community facility. It could be
An old school that's not being
it
used.
could be, it could be. So it's, the plan is laying out what would be needed, what could go in that facility, but does not identify a specific site or building. So that would be considered by the town town facilities task force as well.
Is that still Nancy Hyde on the town facility task force?
Yes, Nancy, I believe Nancy is still the chair of the task force. Again, as we haven't met since last October, so I don't know that there were any changes to that, but. The next question is, how do other towns create vibrant town centers for residents, and what do we need to do to get there? So my response to that is that vibrant town centers are most often created through flexible zoning and through business incentives offered to companies to move into the town centers. The most successful towns build on existing downtown features, including foot traffic, pedestrian traffic, ample parking, good landscaping, light, strong infrastructure support, and those are the things that we've been building over the years. I think how we get there is we stay the course. We continue with our flexible multiple-use overlay zone that we established. We continue with the Islington Center development project, and we remain poised to react in a timely fashion to the next proposal, whether it's on High Street or on Washington Street. We remain ready and engaged, and we keep our citizens informed and interested so that they're ready to react to the next proposal. I think that's the best way to do it, and that's the course that we're taking. Other projects that came to mind that I thought you might want to hear about, 215 High Street. Many of you may recall several years ago there was a proposal for a senior development down on the Harlequin Farm. That went through the planning board, was eventually withdrawn. Then over the past year, there were some Westwood residents that were interested in creating an age-restricted development there, mostly single-family homes with a couple of attached units. They came before the planning board. They were interested in a proposal going forward. They ran into a snag, having difficulty finding units to create as affordable housing. Any project like this, like an open space, age-restricted proposal that's required to have a special permit, has to have an affordability component. And in this case, it's a 15% affordable housing component. These developers were interested in a 19-unit complex, and that would require them to have 3 affordable units. The bylaw requires them to either provide them on site or get the planning board's specific approval for off-site housing. They were interested in off-site housing, but they had trouble finding units that they could purchase. They needed 3 affordable units. So they let their purchase and sale expire. In the meantime, several other developers expressed interest in the property, but none of them have moved to the state of an application. Now I hear that these local residents are interested again. So I expect something to come forward before the end of the year on that, but there's not a current application before the planning board. The planning board is considering some changes to the High Street Starbucks. So Starbucks was approved in 2004 as a retail establishment. In 2004, Starbucks was brand new. It wasn't 2004. It was 1999 when it was first approved. It was a retail establishment, didn't have seating. They actually sold coffee machines and coffee beans. It evolved. It became what we know of as Starbucks today. And in 2004, they reconfigured their parking lot without going back to the planning board to get approval. That was discovered, they were sent to the planning board, and the owners in the planning board could not find a way to make the parking lot safe and meeting the standards. The application was withdrawn with the understanding that it would be coming back after the owners did some work on it. Lo and behold, I don't know what was going on in 2004, to be honest, but it was dropped, never brought back. It was recently discovered that this was an open item, that parking lot configuration had never been officially approved by the planning board. So Abby McCabe, town planner, ordered them back to the planning board. They're now meeting with the planning board, and they're trying to make some tweaks to the existing parking lot to make it safer. And anyone who's familiar with that knows that cars park everywhere. They don't just park in the marked spaces, but they park wherever they can fit, blocking the exits, which exacerbates the dangerous situation. So they're trying to resolve that now. They're before the planning board tonight, hoping to, I'm sorry, they're not there tonight. They've been there at the last meeting, they're coming back at the next meeting, hoping to make some small changes. But what's interesting is that the Salvatore Capital, who owns that building, said that they would be interested in considering redevelopment of the entire property for a much more effective use. So not just restriping the spots and changing the circulation, but perhaps making significant changes to the building, perhaps making a two-story building instead of a single-story building, taking the real estate office that's on the back of the building and putting it on the second floor to free up more parking area in the back. So we're waiting to see what that entails, but that'll be an interesting project that should be coming through, probably not this year, but possibly next year. Foster Block at 22 Everett Street. This has been marketed for several years now as a mixed-use development. There have been a few bites. They don't have an agreement with a proposed developer right now, but there are some developers that are interested in mixed-use commercial and residential. So I do expect something to come through on that, hopefully in 2019, and hopefully a project that can get us some additional affordable units as well. So keep a watch on that. There are probably 3 or 4 other early stage commercial projects in the works, but nothing that's at the point where I can really talk about it. From a planning perspective, I mentioned the open space residential, space and recreation plan that we're working on. We're also working on a housing production plan, and we're about to begin work on updating the 2000 comprehensive plan. There's actually a, I'll give you before I leave here tonight, some applications if you know of anyone who's interested in serving on the comprehensive plan steering committee. The selectmen are looking to appoint between 9 and 18 residents to serve on that. 1 or 2 residents for each of the 9 elements of the comprehensive plan, and we're looking for residents who have specific knowledge and expertise in the different elements of the plan. So in transportation, in economic development, natural and cultural resources, different areas that the plan is going to report on. Also, I'll mention the planning board has recently set up a new Facebook page, and that's to keep residents engaged, not only on projects that come before the planning board for site plan, subdivision, or special permit approval, but most importantly, to get input on the comprehensive plans. So residents who can't make it out to a planning board meeting, but want to engage with the planning board, are encouraged to send their comments in through the Facebook page, and the planning board will address those at their next open meeting.
People don't have Facebook accounts.
Well, for people who don't have Facebook accounts, they still have the standard ways of getting in touch. They can come to the meeting, they can send a phone call or an email, but we're trying to reach out to even more people with yet another way of getting comments.
Time commitment for the
So the comprehensive plan, so I would say the majority of 2019. It'll begin, we're looking for appointments to be made by the selectmen at their meeting in November, and they will get right to work. There will be a public participation process that will involve a visioning session and a survey, and following that, the people who are working on elements, 1 or 2 people together, will actually focus on their area of responsibility, write a draft of that element, not starting from scratch, taking the 2000 plan and updating it. The planning department will provide updated data, and then those people who are working on it will update the goals and priorities, bring it back to the planning board at an open public meeting, and discuss it, and then go from there. Eventually, we hope to have the planning board adopt the plan, probably in late 2019, and then depending on exactly when they adopt it, if they do it as September, October, we'll bring it to a fall town meeting if there is one, and if it's later than that, November or December, then we would bring it to the 2020 annual town meeting. So it's a fairly lengthy procedure. It's not as long as the original creation of the comprehensive plan because it is just an update. But there's quite a bit to look at. We have a lot of the goals and objectives I expect to remain the same as they were in 2000, but some of them I expect to change. A lot of the data will obviously change. I just wanted to weigh in on some discussion with Emily about population and projections, and I just want to make sure everyone understands that Westwood's population has continued to steadily increase from, I'd say, the 1950s at a rate of about 3% a year when you look at it over multiple decades. There are bumps and changes in that. There was a decrease in the 1980s and 90s where our population actually dropped. We had outmigration. And then in the late 90s and 2000s, it increased significantly to overcome that, and those balance out to a 3%. But except for that big dip and rise in that area, it's been a more or less slow and steady progression of about 3% a year. Now, that's the population. The population is continuing to increase, but the school enrollments are cyclical. And we have seen probably since the 1960s a very commonly repeating up and down wave. So I think you can understand how it happens. People move into Westwood when their children are young. They start them in kindergarten and they move out once they're in college. It's a very common phenomenon, and we expect it to increase. So as Emily said, they see projections right now. The bubble is moving through. It's at the high school now. At some point, I expect a new bubble to start in the elementary schools. So I think when you look at the data that Emily will be posting to the website, you'll see that. But it's a steady progression that we've experienced for 50, 60 years. At some point, it will slow down to less than 3%. At some point, simply because we'll be out of land. So there's a point where it'll steady off. But right now, it's still on that about 3% progression. Just want to mention affordable housing units. That's something that we are working diligently on, in addition to the 321 Washington Street units that we're looking to add to the subsidized housing inventory. We have the 10 affordable units at the Westwood Place, Pulte Homes, condominiums at University Avenue. We have the Westwood Housing Authority looking at their properties to see if they can add the 3 units that aren't currently listed on the subsidized housing inventory to the subsidized housing inventory. That requires renovations to those facilities, and it requires a marketing program, fair housing marketing program that allows them to be listed. So we're working on that. The lodge, if a development comes forward for that property, we will be looking at affordable units for a portion of that as well that would have to be eligible for listing. 215 High Street is another project that we hope, if that goes through, and if any of these projects, I can't imagine that the Westwood Lodge project would be up and running before 2020. 215 High Street, unless it gets started very soon, probably wouldn't be either. But that's where our housing production plan comes in. If we don't get over the top with the first few projects I mentioned, our housing production plan buys us another year of safe harbor under 40B. So we're working in concert with a lot of partners to get this done. I mentioned Foster Block. That's another project that we would hope to see some affordable units. We have the Habitat House that was approved by the zoning board and is winding its way through the courts. We hope that we'll be successful on that, and we'll see that added to our subsidized housing inventory. And then there are a couple of other small ones that we actually may see come to fruition before 2020. So just so you know, that's something, I'd say that's one of our strongest focuses right now that we're working on. Also, zoning amendments. There'll be no fall town meeting. The planning board had a couple of zoning amendments that they'd like to discuss that will now be considered for the spring 2019 town meeting. In addition, we have 3 zoning amendments that we actually adopted in fall of 2017 that were disapproved by the Attorney General in response to a claim that was filed by a resident. The way the state law is written, when there's a error in procedure, the Attorney General's office has the ability to override that error in procedure unless there's a claim made by someone that they were harmed by it, and the Attorney General's office has no ability to review the subject of the claim. It doesn't matter if it's factual or not, or if there's actually harm. They simply can't approve it. So we'll bring those back in the spring. In the meantime, one property owner will be suffering because they're not able to do what they wish to do. Unfortunately, it's a commercial property owner, 80 Wilson Way, that was looking to have a cafeteria in its new building. I mentioned earlier KLA 10 Corps moved out of that building because they needed a greater amount of space, and the property owner is obviously looking to release that space, and is harmed by this unfortunate event. But we'll get it back before town meeting and hopefully get it approved again. So that's everything I thought of to share with you. Oh, maybe, let me see, did I already cover all this? Yes, I did. So unless you have any other questions?
Hi, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I had two quick questions about the amendments to the Islington disposition agreement, because I did catch that meeting. The addendums about Phase 3, I'm just curious, are those purely a contingency, or is there some indication that Petruzzello may not complete Phase 3?
Purely contingency. So as discussed in the original LDA, there's always, every closing, first, second, and thirds are dependent on financing. So it's a contingency based on financing. So we looked at what happens in the event that the third closing didn't occur. And the concern was that if the third closing didn't occur, now the developer owns a parcel that they have no way of getting to. So there was a need to make sure that there was an easement that was approved.
And the other one was about the CVS parking amendments. I know there was talk of a parking monitor and signs. I'm just curious, who would incur the costs of those?
The user, I would say. So that was to formalize the planning board's decision. The planning board's decision required that reasonable efforts be made to provide CVS with 40 parking spaces at all times. So while the plan does not allow anyone to say you can park here, you can't park here, we don't physically separate the lots. In the event of large gatherings at Wentworth Hall or elsewhere in Islington that might detract from the CVS parking, there has to be some procedure in place. The planning board just called it reasonable procedures. CVS wanted a definition of what those reasonable procedures would be. So the selectmen agreed to be more specific and say that there would be temporary signage and a monitor as needed.
Yeah, thank you, because in the write-up, I read the amendment, it said the town will provide, so I didn't know if that meant we were paying for the parking.
The town will
monitor.
require it, so it depends on who's conducting the event. So in the, for instance, the sectional finals for Little League that occur at Morrison Park, if they wanted to have use of the municipal parking space for those, they would be required to provide a monitor. If there's some other community event, I don't know, Boy Scout Eagle Court, I don't imagine that would ever rise to the level of attendance that would require a monitor, but something along those lines, something that would take all 72 spaces and leave nothing for CVS would require a monitor. Now, I'll also comment that I don't believe CVS will ever actually need 40 spaces. The CVS that will be there will be larger than the existing one, but it'll function the same way. Just like the one on Route 1 is larger than the one we have here, but it functions in the same way, and you will never see, even on Christmas Eve, one of the probably busiest nights when people are running out to get their last-minute lights and things, you won't see 40 parking spaces used at any one time. So while CVS thinks they need that, I don't believe they ever will.
Is a monitor a police officer?
No, no. It would simply be some person
Somebody
hired to
nagging them.
say, park there.
Oh.
If you're going to this event, park here. Kind of like when you go to, I don't know, fireworks on Christmas, you have, on New Year's, you might have someone standing there from the rec department with an orange vest pointing you to where to park. Something along those lines.
Any other questions? Mike, were you raising? Diane, you okay down there?
Thank you.
I just had one. Back to the Black Heart Tavern.
Blue Heart.
Blue Heart, Black Heart. The developer bought that?
So the land disposition agreement says
Yeah.
that the developer either has to tell us their intention before the first closing, to
Yeah.
either take the land, move the building there, and redevelop it themselves, or they have to offer it to some private entity who gets the land and the building. And if no private entity comes through, then the town has the option
Okay.
of taking the land
The
and building.
land being on the other side of where Wentworth Hall's going to be?
It'll be actually right, between Wentworth Hall and the Northeast Security Building.
Right.
So, and then the third option is that the town could take it and do the
Right.
same, and if none of those options are palatable, then the developer's entitled to tear it down. So we've gotten to the point where he selected the first option. He does want to renovate it, restore it, and use it for mixed use, commercial, possibly with residential above. We don't have full plans. Whatever he does with it, he has to go back to the planning board for approval.
So how does that $75,000,
So,
it's that, the town or the developer?
it all depends on how it's structured. It probably will be a pass-through. So we had received a grant several years ago to do something similar on the Obed Baker House. It was going to be redeveloped for affordable housing, and the owner was going to be the Westwood Housing Authority or the Westwood Affordable Housing Associates. The grant was coming to the town and being passed through to the Westwood Affordable Housing Associates. That never went through. They ended up doing something different where they replicated the building instead of renovating it. So I guess we're working with the state on exactly how we would do this. The funding is not finalized yet, so until it is, I don't know exactly.
But I guess my question is the funding ultimately coming to the town or to the developer?
If it comes to the town, it would pass through to the developer if the developer is the one that does the work. So the town would be, the funds would be reimbursement for historic restoration.
Okay.
So it would add to the incentive to appropriately restore the exterior of the building. So whoever is actually paying for the restoration would get the reimbursement of funds. So at this point, I expect that to be the developer. But I don't know the ins and outs of the grant program because it hasn't been finalized.
If it comes to the town, if the money comes to the town, does an RFP have to be put out?
No, because the money would be for the building itself. It wouldn't be, so, for instance, the Colburn School building next door had historic tax incentive financing. It's a similar program to that. It's historic financing, historic rehabilitation financing that's building specific. So the town may be managing the project. It may pass through and on to the developer, or it may go straight to the developer. I haven't seen the terms yet. But it's not unusual to do where it's a building-specific funding.
Just one comment. I want to just compliment Nora on your usual thorough response to the questions asked and just loaded with tons of information, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. We
Right.
really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I
This
will
is very
leave
enlightening.
information on the comprehensive plan.
I didn't ask
You-
Okay.
Or anyone you know wants to sign up to be a steering committee member. About that.
Perfect. Thank you. So we just have a couple of getting organized things. Thanks, Nora. In the other category, Wes did resign from FinCom. He can't continue the commitment, so unfortunately, he won't be with us any longer. Jim will look to make another appointment, so we'll have a full team of 15, hopefully sooner rather than later. So we'll learn more in the next month or so, you think, Jim?
He's aware,
Yeah.
he formally resigned, so Jim is
The
aware
other
and he's
day.
gonna,
Yeah,
on Friday.
yeah, we just found out.
Jim is on the case.
Right. What'd you say?
No, I said it's a good thing it wasn't vice chair.
That's true. Old business, we need to approve the minutes that Jane attached and sent out ahead of time. Did everyone have a chance to look?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstain? Is that right? Anyone abstaining?
Yeah, I was late to the meeting, so I'll
Okay.
abstain.
Great, Jim, one. Great. Public and press, questions?
Well, she actually left, but I was gonna ask, if phase 3 does not happen and the developer sells off the land, how does it affect us as a town financially?
We can take that maybe, Jane, and follow up?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know offhand, so we can follow up with
You're
more.
not taking out a bond, aren't we, to the library and build on it?
I forget the exact sequencing. to be
I
honest.
could just say, I think that question was asked,
Yeah, I think so,
and at
too.
each step, we were ahead. Not by
Right.
much, but we were ahead.
Right.
But don't count on that, we'll get you the
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah, we did review that in the
Yeah.
spring, I know, before we voted. I just don't recall enough right now. So just for going forward, we do not have a town meeting. I think we talked in the last meeting to use these to kind of get ahead of any and get updates on what's going on in the town. So I would ask if by Friday you could send any topics kind of to Jane so we can get organized. I think we'll use maybe October or November meeting to do the Dottie Pam update. So we'd cancel the meeting and invite any new FinCom meeting. Really? I would make it, well, we'll talk about the venue for it. But I think it was really to try to free up time for the training aspect, and then make that available on the future website and stuff. So we'll figure out how to fit that in. But if there are things like, I know we did public safety, I think, 1 December. I think some of the ideas were like, should we have Tom Philbin come back and talk about the energy? So if you could funnel those through. And then what I'd like to do, as we're expecting, information ahead of time, I really do want to get questions out. I think it makes for a better conversation if we can ask people to come and give them time to anticipate what questions we might have. So if we can at least get the topics by Friday and then flesh out the questions from there and set the agendas, that will be good. Anything else? No? Great. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone abstaining? No? Okay, great. We'll pass it.
Right.
Have a good night.
Oh, gavel.
Here we go.